My mother told my fiancé to choose my brother because he could give her a better life. I walked away in silence. Years later, they came to my gala and froze when they saw the woman standing beside me. My name is Adrian. I am 29 now, but this story began when I was 23. Back then, I was the kind of man people described politely as still figuring things out. I was not exactly broke. I had a steady job as a junior architect at a small firm, and I was proud of the work I was doing. But I was not driving expensive cars, buying designer watches, or posting vacation photos from exotic islands the way my older brother Lucas did. Lucas was my mother's pride and joy. In her eyes, everything he did had a golden glow around it. Every choice he made was ambitious. Every risk he took was bold. Every success he had was proof that he was destined for something greater. With me, it was different. Anything I accomplished was treated like a nice start, a decent effort, something that might matter one day if I aimed higher. My mother had a way of turning criticism into advice, but somehow every word still felt like a cut. I grew up knowing she believed Lucas was built for greatness, while I was meant to stand somewhere off to the side, clapping politely, while he received the applause. Then I met Claire. Claire was my fiancée, and for the first time in my life, it felt like my luck had finally turned. She was warm, funny, and grounded. She did not care that I did not live some flashy, polished life. She liked that I cared about my work. She liked that I could talk for hours about buildings, spaces, light, and design. She liked that I was not obsessed with proving myself to strangers. After a year together, we got engaged. We were planning a small, elegant wedding that felt like us. Nothing massive, nothing showy. Just a beautiful day with the people who mattered. My mother was polite about the engagement, but I could tell she was not thrilled. She made comments that sounded harmless on the surface, but landed exactly where she wanted them to. Are you sure you can provide for her, Adrian? It's a big responsibility. Women have needs. Marriage is different when you're still building yourself. At first, I brushed it off. My mother had always been like that. I told myself she was just worried in her own blunt, judgmental way. The first real crack appeared during a family dinner. We were all seated around my parents' long mahogany table. Lucas was across from me, relaxed and confident as always. My mother sat at the head of the table like a queen surveying her court. The room smelled of roasted chicken wine and expensive candles. In the middle of dinner, my mother looked at Claire and casually said, "Claire, you would look stunning in a place like Lucas's penthouse. You've been there, haven't you?" Claire smiled politely and said, "No, I haven't." My mother did not miss a beat. "You should. The view of the city is incredible. I keep telling Lucas he should settle down. Someone like you could inspire him to." I laughed it off at the time because I wanted to believe it was just my mother being tone deaf. But under the table, Claire's hand went tense in mine. Her fingers stiffened. Her smile stayed in place, but something about her changed. That night after we left, Claire asked me if my mother disliked her. I told her it was not about her. I said my mother had a lifelong habit of comparing me to Lucas, and that she had been doing it since we were kids. What I did not understand was that this was not harmless dinner conversation. My mother was planting seeds. Over the next few months, small things started changing. Claire would come back from errands and mention that she had run into Lucas, who just happened to be in the same part of town. She would receive texts from my mother inviting her to help plan a surprise for me, which I thought was sweet at first, until I noticed those surprises never actually happened. Whenever I asked about them, Claire became vague. She would say it was just small talk, nothing important, nothing worth overthinking. I wanted to believe her. Then came the night I will never forget. I had worked late on a project and stopped by my parents' house to drop off some old family photos my mother had been asking for. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed Lucas's car parked out front. Inside the house, laughter spilled from the living room. I do not know why I looked through the side window. It was instinct, not suspicion. But the moment I did, I froze. My mother, Lucas, and Claire were sitting together with glasses of wine in their hands, deep in conversation. My mother was leaning forward, speaking in a low voice, but it was clear enough for me to hear. "Claire, you're a smart woman. Lucas can give you the life Adrian never could. He's already established. He can give you security status, everything a woman deserves." Lucas smirked like this was perfectly normal. Claire did not look offended. She looked thoughtful. My heart pounded so hard I thought they might hear it through the window. I did not stay to hear more. I did not knock, I did not storm inside. I turned around, got back in my car, drove home, and sat alone in the dark for hours, replaying my mother's words again and again. Every instinct told me to confront them immediately, but another part of me, a quieter and colder part, told me to wait, to watch, to see exactly how deep this betrayal went. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Claire pulling away. She was too tired for date nights, too busy for wedding planning, too distracted when we were together. Then, one evening, she sat me down at my own kitchen table. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, like she was in a meeting, instead of ending our future. "Adrian, I think we rushed into this," she began. She could not meet my eyes. My chest tightened before she even finished the sentence. She talked about needing stability, about not being sure we were aligned for the future, about how love was not always enough. I knew exactly whose words those were. They had my mother's fingerprints all over them. Then came the final blow. "Luke endures understands what I need." I did not ask whether she meant emotionally or financially. I did not need to. She packed her things within the week. There was no dramatic fight, no screaming, no begging her to stay. I simply let her go. But as she walked out of my door with her suitcase in hand, she gave me a look that was half guilty and half triumphant. And in that moment, I knew my mother had gotten exactly what she wanted. After that, I cut off all contact. No calls, no text, no holiday visits, no explanations. I left my job, moved to a different city, and rebuilt my life from the ground up with a kind of single-minded focus I had never had before. I did not tell them where I went. As far as they knew, I had vanished. And in a way, I had. But the thing about disappearing is that you get to choose when to come back. Years later, I did. It happened on a glittering Friday night, beneath the warm glow of chandeliers at a lavish charity gala. I was no longer the younger son who was still figuring things out. I was the man running the event. I was the host, the name on the program, the person donors crossed the room to greet. And when I saw my mother, Lucas, and Claire walk through those grand doors, their arms linked like a perfect family portrait, I smiled. Because the moment they saw who I had become, and more importantly, who was standing beside me, their smiles vanished in an instant. That was when they saw my wife. The moment our eyes met across the ballroom, it felt as if time froze, except for the sharp, invisible crackle in the air between us. My mother's smile faltered. Lucas's grip on Claire's hand tightened ever so slightly, and Claire looked like she had stepped into a nightmare she did not know was still breathing. My wife stood beside me in an emerald green gown that caught the light with every move. She tilted her head and whispered something that made me laugh softly. I did not need to look at my family to know they were burning with questions. But before that night, before I ever stood in that room, in control, there were years when their shadows still reached me, even from far away. At first, I told myself I had moved on. I worked brutal hours. I poured every bit of myself into my career. I started my own design firm with a small team and a few risky contracts that could have ended me if they had failed. They did not fail. Within 3 years, we were winning bids against firms that had once dismissed me without a second glance. I did not post about it. I did not send updates. I did not announce my wins to people who had already decided I was the lesser son. I knew my family. If they did not hear my name, they would assume I had stayed exactly where they left me. That suited me just fine. But then, small reminders of them started creeping back into my life. At first, it was an email from an old family friend, just checking in. Hidden inside the friendly message were comments about how Lucas and Claire were doing so well. They had bought a huge house in the suburbs. Lucas's business was booming, though knowing Lucas, that probably meant his investors were doing the real work. And of course, my mother was proud as ever. Apparently, she kept telling people Lucas had saved Claire from a life of uncertainty. It was not just pride. It was rewriting history. They were erasing me from my own story. The real gut punch came about 2 years after I left, when I attended an industry networking event. I was there to meet potential partners, and halfway through the evening, I heard a familiar laugh. I turned toward the sound and saw Lucas in a tailored navy suit, glass in hand, holding court with a small circle of people. Claire was on his arm, wearing the kind of diamond bracelet that practically screamed, "Look what I can afford." For a moment, I considered walking the other way. Then I realized they had not seen me yet. That was when I overheard Lucas say, "Yeah, my mom always knew I was the one who would make something of himself." My brother meant well, but he never had the drive. Claire saw that too. The people around him chuckled politely. Claire only sipped her wine with the faintest smirk. It was such a clean, public dismissal of my entire existence that I had to walk outside before I said something I would regret. After that night, the anger stopped being a dull background noise. It became something sharper, something I could use. Still, they kept appearing at the edges of my life. Lucas sent me a LinkedIn connection request out of nowhere. Not to reconcile, not to apologize. He invited me to a business opportunity presentation for one of his ventures. I did not respond. My mother sent an email around the holidays one year, guilt-tripping me about not making an effort and hinting that family always forgives. Forgives. As if I had been the one who betrayed anyone. And yet, I could tell from the way they kept trying to loop me back in on their terms that they still wanted me in my old place. They wanted me to see their success. They wanted me to silently acknowledge their version of events where I was the one who had been left behind. What they did not know was that my life had quietly grown far beyond theirs. I moved into a penthouse not because I needed to show off, but because I could. I invested in real estate. I built side businesses. By my late 20s, I was no longer simply doing well. I was in a position where I could walk into a room and control the conversation. And the more I built, the more one thought circled in my mind. If the day ever came when our paths crossed again, I would not just be ready. I would be holding all the cards. That day came sooner than I expected. An acquaintance of mine, someone high up in the philanthropic world, suggested I host a charity gala for a cause I genuinely cared about. It was not just a business move. It was personal. It was a chance to stand on a stage, not as someone's lesser son, but as a man who had built his own name. Invitations went out across my network. Some of them intentionally reached into the old social circles where my family still lingered. And so, that night, in the grand hall beneath crystal chandeliers, with cameras flashing and a string quartet playing in the background, I watched them walk in. My mother, Lucas, and Claire. They were dressed to impress, clearly thinking they were walking into another room where they belonged, at the center. Then they realized whose name was printed on the gold-trimmed program. Lucas's face flickered with something between surprise and discomfort. My mother tried to recover with a gracious smile that did not reach her eyes. And Claire kept looking from me to my wife, her expression tightening, as if she had just been caught inside a memory she did not want to remember. I could feel the tension building, like a bow being drawn back. But I did not walk over. Not yet. I wanted them to sit with it. I wanted them to feel the ground shifting under their feet as the night went on. Then, in a moment I will never forget, my mother leaned toward Lucas and whispered something, probably thinking I could not see. He nodded. Whatever she said, it was clear they were already scheming. They still thought they could play me. That was their first mistake. It happened about 40 minutes into the gala, right after the first round of speeches ended. I had been moving through the crowd, shaking hands, smiling for photos, and letting my wife handle conversations with some of the higher-profile donors. From across the room, I noticed Lucas and Claire slip away from the main floor. At first, I thought nothing of it. People wandered off at events like this all the time. Then I caught a glimpse of my mother following them. Something in my gut tightened. It was not curiosity that pulled me after them. It was instinct. The same instinct that had made me stop outside that living room years earlier, when I heard my mother offering my fiancé to my brother like a business deal. I moved quietly, weaving through waiters carrying trays of champagne, until I reached a side corridor leading toward the private lounge area. The venue had several smaller rooms set aside for quiet meetings. I found the three of them inside one of those rooms with the door half open. My mother's voice carried just enough for me to hear. "You need to use this. He's in over his head here. All this flash, all these people, it's just for show. Find out who is backing him. If we can get in on it, we can make sure he doesn't shut us out again." Lucas leaned against the wall, looking smug. I doubt he has the capital for something like this on his own. There's probably some investor propping him up. We figure out who. Maybe we offer them a better deal. Then Claire's voice cut in calm and measured, as if she were discussing a dinner menu. Or I could just talk to him. He used to trust me. He would tell me things if I approached it the right way. He is still a man, Lucas. You know how to use that. I did not move. I stood there and absorbed every word like a slow drip of poison. They were not just here to attend my event. They were actively plotting to undermine me. They wanted to pry into my business, identify the people behind me, and take something they assumed I had not earned. And Claire was not just my ex. She was the woman who had once promised to marry me, now casually offering to manipulate me like a target. It was surreal. I was standing in my own event space, in a tailored suit I had bought with money I earned myself, listening to the same people who had gutted me years ago try to do it again. I thought about walking in right then. I thought about tearing into them in front of each other. But something stopped me. Not fear, strategy. Because in that moment, I realized something important. They had not changed. After all those years, they still thought I was the same younger brother, the same son they could push around. They were so convinced of their superiority that they did not even consider the possibility that I might be listening, or that I might already know more than they did. As I stood there with my chest tight with anger, my wife appeared at the far end of the corridor. She caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, silently asking what was happening. I gave the faintest shake of my head, a signal to hold back. She did not press. Instead, she turned and disappeared into the crowd again, giving me the space to make my decision. Then I heard the final, unfiltered truth fall from my mother's mouth. He was always the weak one. He's lucky we even came tonight. This could be our way to finally fold him into something worthwhile. And if he doesn't play along? She let the sentence hang. Lucas smirked. Claire looked at him and then back toward the ballroom as if she could already see the path opening in front of her. That was it. The last shred of lingering family loyalty I had been holding on to snapped clean in two. Whatever hope there had been for reconciliation, or even some civil version of coexistence, vanished. They had made it perfectly clear. They were not there for me. They were there for what they thought they could take from me. I stepped back from the doorway, my decision already forming. If they wanted a game, I would give them one. But it would not be the game they thought they were playing. For the first time in years, I felt that same cold, quiet resolve I had felt the night Claire walked out of my apartment. Only this time, I was not going to disappear. This time, they were. I did not confront them that night. Not yet. That was the hardest part. I walked back into the main ballroom with my face composed and my posture steady, even though inside, my stomach felt like I had swallowed glass. My wife glanced at me when I returned to her side. She did not ask what happened, but the slight narrowing of her eyes told me she already had a guess. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation, clinking glasses and forced smiles. Every time I looked across the room, I caught them watching me. My mother had the same assessing gaze she had worn my entire life. Lucas wore a calculating smirk, and Claire had an expression I could not quite read. Was it curiosity? Anticipation? Or just the same quiet arrogance she had shown when she left me? When the gala ended and the last guest filtered out, I stayed behind with my team to handle the final details. The music was off, the lights were dimmed, the silence of the empty hall felt heavy. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head replaying again and again. Use this. Get in on it. He's lucky we came. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my wife slept beside me. I felt something I had not felt in years. A familiar ache, the same one I carried in the first months after they betrayed me. Back then, it had been loneliness. This time, it was sharper. It was not simply that they had hurt me again. It was that they reminded me how much I had allowed their absence to shape me. Over the following weeks, I went through the motions of my life, but I was not myself. I made small mistakes at work. Nothing large enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel them. I found myself replaying every past slight. Every moment when I had stood in Lucas's shadow, every time I had swallowed my pride instead of speaking. It was like reopening an old wound that had never fully healed. I started avoiding social events where they might appear. I declined invitations from mutual acquaintances. My wife noticed and asked if I was feeling burned out. I told her I was just tired from work, but that was not the truth. The truth was, I felt the same urge I had felt years earlier. The urge to vanish again, to build a wall between myself and everything connected to them. But I did not, because somewhere inside that fog of frustration and exhaustion, I realized I had two choices. I could let them push me back into the shadows the way they had done before, or I could turn this boiling, unspent anger into something else, something useful. So I started paying attention again. I watched. I listened. Whenever someone mentioned Lucas's business, I asked casual questions, just enough to learn that things were not as rock solid as he liked to pretend. There were rumors of missed deadlines, investors pulling out, tension behind the scenes. Claire, I heard, was keeping up appearances, but a few people hinted that she was not exactly happy playing the role of the perfect wife. I made no moves yet. Not outwardly, but in my mind, pieces were shifting into place. I started to imagine what it would look like not just to defend myself this time, but to hit back publicly, unmistakably, and in a way they could not twist. Still, the ache lingered. I had come so far. And yet, seeing them again reminded me how much of my success had been built in reaction to them. It was no longer enough to keep building my life quietly. I needed them to know exactly who I had become without them, and I needed them to know what crossing me would cost. As I began quietly laying the groundwork, I realized something chilling. They were still trying to play their game. Every so often, a mutual friend would pass along a message from my mother asking whether we could meet for coffee. Lucas sent a single text saying we should talk about opportunities. Claire did not reach out directly, but I heard through the grapevine that she had been asking about my wife. They thought they were circling me, but I was already building the trap. I decided the first step would not be confrontation. It would be elevation. If they thought they could still reach me, still get close enough to play their games, then I would rise so far above their reach that they would have to crane their necks just to see where I was standing. The months after the gala became a blur of calculated momentum. I threw myself into my firm with a precision that bordered on obsession. Every pitch became sharper. Every proposal was backed by research so airtight, it was nearly impossible to refuse. I expanded into markets I had been cautious about before. High-end commercial spaces, luxury residential projects, clients with deep pockets and long memories. These were not just jobs, they were statements, and those statements were heard. Within 8 months, my company was not just profitable, it was thriving. We landed a project that put my name in industry publications, the kind of coverage that stayed in people's minds. My face appeared on the cover of one magazine, smiling in front of a model of a high-profile development. It was not vanity. It was visibility. The more my name appeared, the more I noticed the way people treated me changing. Doors that had been closed to me years earlier now opened with invitations. Meanwhile, I did not focus only on architecture. I diversified: real estate investments, partnerships, hospitality. Even a small stake in a tech startup run by a friend from my early career days. Every move was deliberate. Every step made it harder for them to believe the week one narrative they had spent years feeding people. And as my professional life rose, so did my personal life. My wife and I traveled: Paris, Santorini, Kyoto. Each trip was a reminder of the life I had built without anyone's approval but my own. She was more than a partner. She was my sounding board, my confidant. She never pushed me to act against my family, but she understood. Sometimes she understood without me even having to say the words. I started hosting events. Not on the scale of the gala, but intimate, carefully curated evenings with influential guests. Politicians, business leaders, creatives, philanthropists, people who valued discretion but also remembered who made them feel seen. Word got around. Suddenly, I was not just a businessman, I was a connector. A name worth knowing. That was when I started hearing about Lucas more often, and not in flattering ways. His business was slipping. 2 of his largest contracts had fallen through. An investor had backed out after a disagreement over spending. There were whispers that he had over-leveraged himself buying that mansion in the suburbs, and Claire's name appeared in hushed conversations, beside words like restless and isolated. I did not reach out. I did not gloat. I let the distance grow because I knew every inch of that distance would make my eventual move sharper. The turning point came when I was invited to co-chair a massive annual fundraising event, one that completely eclipsed the gala I had hosted before. This was not just a charity event. It was a power nexus, a room where deals were made over glasses of champagne, where the right introduction could change someone's entire trajectory overnight. The invitation was not just an honor. It was a declaration that I had arrived in a league they could never have imagined for me. And I made sure the guest list included just enough people from the old circles to guarantee the news would reach my mother, Lucas, and Claire. Not as an invitation. Not yet. But as a headline they could not ignore. By then, my network was wide enough that any information I wanted, I could get. I did not even have to dig for it. Mutual contacts volunteered things unprompted, as though feeding me updates about their decline was some kind of favor. Each piece of news became another brick in the wall I was building between the man they thought I was and the man I had become. Still, I kept my movements quiet. I wanted them curious. I wanted them wondering how I had gone from the struggling younger son to someone they could not even approach without an introduction. Most importantly, I wanted them to come to me, because when they finally did, I would be ready. That opportunity arrived faster than I expected. A mutual acquaintance, someone who still drifted between my world and theirs, let slip that Lucas was desperate to land a contract on a development I was partially funding. Lucas did not know I was involved yet, but he would. And that was when I decided it was time to stop letting them circle in the dark. It was time to draw them into the light. The tip about Lucas's desperation was the crack I had been waiting for. The project was a luxury mixed-use development on prime real estate in a booming part of the city. I was not the public face of it, and that was deliberate. My stake was hidden behind a holding company, shielded by layers of investment partners. On paper, I was one of many contributors. In reality, I had more influence over the decision-making than almost anyone outside the inner circle could guess. I called my contact on the project's board, a man named Porter, who had a fondness for expensive cigars and even more expensive secrets. "I hear there's interest from a Lucas Hale," I said casually over lunch, watching his reaction. Porter smirked. "Your brother?" he asked, surprised. "He's been making noise about wanting in, but his proposal is shaky. And between you and me, his reputation isn't exactly helping." That was useful, more than useful. Reputation in my circles was not just image. It was currency, and Lucas was running low. I leaned back, swirling the last sip of my drink. "If he pushes again, tell him the board is considering other candidates." Then I paused just long enough to make the next part sound like an afterthought. "But if I were to back someone's involvement, it might carry weight." Porter caught on immediately. He did not press for details. In that world, knowing too much could become a liability. But the seed was planted. Lucas's access now depended on me, whether he realized it or not. Over the next few weeks, I quietly gathered more threads. Through another contact, a financial advisor I had met at a charity dinner, I learned that Lucas had taken on high-interest bridge loans to cover cash flow problems. That explained the urgency. He was not chasing the development only for prestige. He needed the payout to keep from sinking. Then came the real gem. Claire. I did not go looking for dirt, but sometimes dirt finds you. A woman I had worked with on a design project mentioned that she had seen Claire at an upscale cafe with a man who was definitely not Lucas. She was not being coy. She described them laughing, leaning in close, and holding hands across the table. I did not react outwardly. But inside, I felt an old familiar flicker of satisfaction. Not because I cared about Claire anymore. I did not, but because I knew what it meant. The cracks in their perfect image were widening, and now I held more than enough leverage to pull them apart completely. But I did not rush. This was not about exposing them immediately. It was about timing. It was about engineering a moment so precise that when the truth landed, it would leave them no escape route. That was when I called the event coordinator for the annual fundraising gala I was co-chairing. I gave them an updated guest list. It was long curated and filled with people I wanted in that room. Near the bottom, I added 3 names that would seem out of place to anyone who did not know the history. My mother, Lucas, Claire. It was not a peace offering. It was bait. The invitations went out 2 weeks later, embossed on thick cream cardstock and sealed with the event's crest. I knew they would accept. Pride would not let them stay away. Not from an event where I would be greeting guests at the door, shaking hands, and giving the keynote address. And when they walked into that ballroom, they would not only see me, they would see the people whose respect they had always craved. The kind of people who did not just talk about influence, but wielded it like a blade. I would be standing in the center of that world. They would be on the outside trying to find a way in. And that was when I would decide whether to let them in at all. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear. It was the kind of autumn evening where even the air felt expensive. The venue was a restored Art Deco theater that glowed from within every window, spilling warm light onto the marble steps. I stood at the entrance with my wife, greeting guests as they arrived. Each handshake was deliberate. Each smile was measured. This was my arena now. Then the black sedan pulled up. My mother stepped out first, in a deep navy gown. Her expression was poised but hungry, scanning the crowd for recognition. I did not flinch. Lucas followed in a suit that was almost perfect. Almost. It was just a touch too eager, like he was trying to prove he still belonged among people like this. Claire emerged last, her dress shimmering in the lamplight, her arm hooked through his. She smiled, but it was thin. "Adrian," my mother said warmly, as though the last decade had never happened. "What a surprise to see you here." I returned the smile, cool and steady. "Not a surprise, Mom. I co-chair this year." The flicker in her eyes was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Lucas glanced around, clearly noting who else was in attendance. Names he had tried to court for years. Claire's gaze kept darting toward my wife, who stood beside me with effortless confidence. The kind of confidence that made people take notice without her needing to say a word. Inside the theater had been transformed into a jewel box of gold and deep crimson. The tables were dressed in rich linens. Each centerpiece was a burst of fresh flowers and candlelight. The stage was prepared for the evening's program with a large screen displaying images of the charity's work. I made sure their table was in full view of the stage. More importantly, I made sure they were seated within earshot of several key investors from the development Lucas was chasing. Throughout cocktail hour, I drifted from group to group. I engaged in easy conversation, dropping just enough hints about current projects and selective partnerships to pique curiosity. When I finally approached their table, I did it with deliberate calm. "Lucas," I said, "I hear you've been busy in real estate." He straightened, clearly pleased to be acknowledged. "Yeah," he said, "working on some big deals. Actually, I've been looking at that downtown development. Might be the right fit for me." He said it loudly enough for the nearby investors to hear. I gave a slow nod. "Ah, the one my company is funding." The silence that followed was sharp. One of the investors at the next table turned his head slightly, interest caught. Lucas blinked, trying to hide the sudden calculation in his eyes. My mother recovered first. "Well, isn't that a coincidence?" she said. "Maybe you two could work together." "That's the thing," I said, evenly keeping my tone friendly. "We're being very selective. We only work with partners who have the right stability and reputation. It's not personal. It's just business." Claire shifted in her seat and crossed her legs, her jaw tight. She looked like she wanted to speak, but thought better of it. I caught the glance she threw toward one of the investors. It was not lost on me. The first course was served, and conversation moved around them like water flowing past a stone. I did not need to say more. The message was already there, hanging in the air for everyone nearby to absorb. I was the gatekeeper now. But the real move came later that evening, during the auction segment. The host was calling for bids on an exclusive architectural consultation, an item I had donated personally. I expected it to go to one of the higher-profile donors. But when the bidding reached an impressive figure, Lucas raised his paddle. The room reacted with surprised murmurs and a few raised brows. I smiled. "That's generous, Lucas," I said into the microphone. Though I should mention, the consultation is contingent on working with clients whose projects align with our brand standards. The words were polite. But in that crowd, they landed like a verdict. Everyone understood. He could bid all he wanted, but without my approval, there was no deal. The host moved on quickly. Lucas lowered his paddle, his face tight. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Claire suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. I had drawn the line in front of everyone who mattered to them, and I had done it without raising my voice. They could not spin it as pettiness. It was just business, and they had been shut out. But the night was not over. I had one last card to play. It came during the final toast when I invited my wife onto the stage to thank the donors. As she stepped up beside me, the lights catching the diamond on her hand, I saw Claire's eyes widen just a fraction. Recognition dawned. Because my wife was not only stunning, she was someone Claire had met years ago briefly, back when Claire was still with me. Someone Claire had underestimated completely. I watched Claire lean ever so slightly toward Lucas, whispering something I could not hear. Her expression looked pale beneath the golden lights. That was the moment I knew they realized the game had shifted entirely. And I was not finished. After the toast, I stepped down from the stage with my wife, while the applause rolled over us like a wave. We returned to mingling, but I could feel their eyes on me from across the room. My mother, Lucas, and Claire sat in a tight, silent triangle at their table. The energy around them had shifted completely. Earlier, they had leaned into conversation, smiling for attention. Now, people passed by without stopping. It was not only me they were avoiding. It was the optics. In a room like that, reputation was currency. And that night, they had lost a stack of it in front of the very people they had been hoping to impress. The real hit came 2 days later. Porter called me. "Just a heads up," he said. Lucas reached out again about the development. We told him we're going in a different direction. Didn't mention you, but he'll know. I thanked him and hung up. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from a mutual contact I had not spoken to in years. Heard about your brother, they said. Word is spreading fast. Investors are skittish. This might be the start of the end for him. Within a month, 2 more of Lucas's backers pulled out, citing strategic differences. His company's social media went quiet. The flashy public appearances dried up. By winter, the mansion in the suburbs was quietly listed for sale. Claire, I heard, did not stick around. She resurfaced in another city. Her name occasionally appeared in charity event write-ups, but always without the same sheen she had worn before. Those close to her knew why. Stories have a way of traveling, especially the kind whispered over wine by people who enjoy a little schadenfreude. As for my mother, she tried to call once. The voicemail was short and brittle. I think we should talk. Family is important. I did not return it. There was nothing left to say. Family is important, but not the kind that treats you like a pawn. The following year, I hosted the gala again. It was bigger, brighter, and more exclusive than before. As I stood on stage during the opening speech, I scanned the room and thought about the first gala. When they had walked in believing they still held power over me, they had not returned since. I raised my glass, the lights catching on the rim. To progress, I said, smiling at the sea of faces before me, and to remembering that the people who doubt you often end up proving you right. The crowd laughed and clinked glasses, but in my mind, I was toasting 3 empty seats that no one else had noticed were missing. And that was the last time I ever thought of them as anything but a closed chapter.